I don't quite think that's true. Working Americans are very well aware of the dependence of capitalism on permanent war and on the vast amounts that the Pentagon extricates from taxpayers and from wage producers throughout the United States. By the way, that's but one facet of the way capitalism takes people and exploits them and drives them into the ground. The recent collapse of the banking system was bailed out, as you know, by Obama and his predecessor to the tune of $23.7 trillion, which is the documented figure that was presented by Neil Barofsky, the Special Inspector General, before Congress. $23.7 trillion is more than double the gross domestic product of the United States. And to put it in some perspective, $1 trillion is $1,000 a minute since the birth of Jesus. Yes, Americans well understand the extent to which large industry dependent on the military is exploiting them, is driving their living standards down, is eviscerating them. And of course, what is occurring within the frontiers of the United States plays out on an even more vicious and intensive scale across the super exploited world.
Okay.
The uprising in Egypt arises from the fact that less than 2% of the less than something like 60% of the population earn less than $2 a day.
All right, let me get Professor Shakespeare. Let me get Professor Shakespeare back in on this. Now, Professor Shakespeare, we've been talking about some of the repressive tactics that have been used, and also the repressive tactics that have been used against the Palestinians in general and Gaza in particular, that people have died at checkpoints trying to seek medical help, and Gazans are basically imprisoned, impoverished, and we know about the war that was waged against them. So does the United States basically want to reward Israel for these tactics? And we also know that there was a humanitarian flotilla that was attacked just last year. And isn't it odd then that the United States would sort of reward Israel with even more money this year?
Well, it's a little bit worse than that. You see, essentially, Zionist Israel controls American foreign policy. They're hand in glove. And both those countries have a concept that they can, in fact, bully, browbeat, dominate, and then use force. And they cannot see that the world is changing. They think that they can support these corrupt totalitarian regimes, that they can continue to do this forever. Well, they can't. There's an Islamic awakening, there's a democratic awakening, there's a demographic awakening of huge numbers of educated young people who, as Ralph Sherman said, a large number of them are on under $2 or $3 a day. So American strategy for the long term is completely out of touch with reality. It is moving, it is like its economy. Its international policy and its economy are both Titanics, which are governed by a ship's captain and crew who think they understand everything and cannot see that they're going straight into the icebergs ahead.
Now, Professor, do you agree with Mr. Showman that the American people, or let's say the British people, are totally aware of how they're being exploited in this way? Do you agree with that?
The British people are certainly aware of this. Unfortunately, our governmental structures are also controlled by Zionism. For example, I mean, a good half or two-thirds of the Conservative Party are all hand in glove with various Israeli societies, and that proportion is much higher than for any other country. Now, I'm afraid it's the political structure which is, and they're supporting Bahrain. The present Foreign Secretary is supporting the killing in Bahrain.
Okay. Well, let me turn to Gaza and get Dr. Massoud back in on this now. Speaking of the situations that's taking place in the Middle East and North Africa, there's been a lot of condemnation today, actually, by the international community of what the U.S. or the international community is saying the use of cluster bombs in Libya by Gaddafi. Now, however, when Israel has used cluster bombs, phosphorus bombs, and depleted uranium weapons, nothing was said. Why is that? And will this expose more and more the hypocritical nature of the U.S.'s foreign policy?
Well, this is what's called double standard policy, which has been adopted by the United States for many decades to support the Israeli side and not the Palestinian side. What's happening in Libya and other places in which the United States administration has been criticizing some regimes like Libyan regime and supporting the people of Libya. This is what is supposed to happen in Gaza and in Palestine. What we had in 2008, 2009, the war against the Gaza Strip by the Israeli side, in which the Israeli side used its own mighty and power and used all its abilities, military abilities, against the people, against civilians in the Gaza Strip. We did not witness any position, any stand by the United States administration against the Israeli side. This is why it's called hypocrisy and double standard policy. And because we believe here in Palestine that the American administration has a commitment towards the Israeli side to protect Israel and its own security at the expense of the Palestinian people. They believe this would help peace, but we believe this would jeopardize any chance for peace in the Middle East.
All right, now, Mr. Showman, what do you think it would take, or how likely is it that the international community would actually impose a no-fly zone over Gaza for Israel, as the Strip has witnessed massive killings and collective punishment by Tel Aviv?
It would take a revolution in a number of countries, notably in Western Europe and the United States. What you call the international community consists of powers with the same class structure that we have in our country, the United States, where 1% of the population owns more than 95% of the rest of us combined, where approximately 5,000 people have command of what was called the controlling heights of the economy through banking and corporate structures. That same class structure is characteristic of the West European capitalist states, and the so-called international community is composed of governments that are class-structured governments. They are basically country-selling regimes. So it is not the United States, it's the American ruling class that we are addressing. With respect to the Zionist apparatus and the Israeli state, a creation of U.S. imperialism, funded, as we've been discussing, with $360 billion from its inception. You know, the Zionist apparatus, which comes out of the privileged banking and corporate elite of the Jewish populations of Europe, when the mass of those people were heavily exploited and victimized and persecuted, identified with the established order and offered their services, first to the Tsar of Russia, then to the Kaiser of Germany, then to the French Imperium, then to the British Raj, then to Mussolini, and they didn't stop at Adolf Hitler. The Zionists had an intimate relationship with the Nazis. Ben-Gurion brought Eichmann to Palestine for 6 months in the 30s. Baron von Mildenstein, the head of the SS. I discuss all this in the Hidden History. The point I'm trying to make with respect to this is that the Zionist state represents shock troops for imperialism in the region. With due respect to Professor Shakespeare, for whom I have a high regard, the Zionist apparatus does not control U.S. capitalism. They are shock troops. They are integral within the enforcement arm of the imperium. They are a central component of the destruction of the Arab and pan-Middle Eastern anti-colonial revolution. They are the means through which country-selling regimes are kept in place brutally, and they are the enforcement arm, ever using this vast weaponry, particularly the kinds of weapons that we've been discussing tonight: white phosphorus, nerve gas, germ warfare, and these fiendish cluster bombs that are deployed against civilian populations. Remember that the Palestinian people were driven out of their country by a series of massacres from one end of the country to the other, relentless massacres, and out of a total of 460 towns, 380 were reduced to rubble and the land of the remaining confiscated. That's the essential genocidal character of the Zionist occupation of the Palestinian people, and their objective is to remove the Palestinian people not only from their land, but from history. Okay. In this enterprise, this bloody genocidal enterprise, their controllers and their suppliers and their sustainers are U.S. imperialism and its allies, its sub-allies in Europe. Those are the realities of today. They talk about Gaddafi using cluster bombs. Cluster bombs were used ferociously throughout Iraq. Not just cluster bombs, but depleted uranium, and it's been used in
uranium.
Libya as well. Depleted uranium, which is a form of nuclear warfare, tactical nuclear warfare.
All right, let me get Professor Shakespeare.
The aquifer, which poisons
okay,
the...
Mr. Showman, let me get Mr. Shakespeare in on this. So sorry to interrupt you, but we're just so limited in time. Now, Professor Shakespeare, okay, so we've set this up. We've talked about the problems. What is the answer? At this point in time, I'm sure a lot of American people would actually be interested in seeing what would be the answer to actually free them from what has actually become a very difficult situation for them and also for the rest of the world. What is the key to break this situation that exists between Washington and Tel Aviv?
It is the ultimate thing here at the moment is about democracy, and the United States and Israel are linked in inextricably with the totalitarian fascist regimes, and it is now a very rapidly developing fascism which is totally intolerant and enforces its aims with extreme violence, and of course has the scapegoat which they're trying to put forward must be Iran, when Iran has nothing to do with it. So it's up to people to push forward for democracy. I'm very pleased to see the way that the women of the Middle East are coming forward in a most splendidly brave way. So it's all about democracy, and we must expose the extreme hypocrisy of the United States. Though, of course, there's no point in exposing the hypocrisy of Israel. They're beyond correction. They are so mentally violent and so locked in their extremism that there's no hope for changing them whatsoever. But there is some hope of changing the United States, in particularly having an effect on the half of the American State Department, half of whom are very sensible and humane people. The trouble is American foreign policy is actually controlled by the neocons, the extreme right-wingers and the fascists, who are led by that spiteful, vicious woman, Hillary Clinton.
Okay, and on that note, I am so sorry we are out of time, but I'd like to thank all of my guests for the program. Professor of Binary Economics, Professor Rodney Shakespeare from London, Professor of Islamic University of Gaza, Dr. Hani al-Bassous in Gaza, and the author of Hidden History of Zionism, Mr. Ralph Showman from Berkeley, California. Thank you all for being with us. And as always, viewers, thank you so much for tuning in to the News Analysis. Join us here, same time, same place tomorrow, as we take a close look at one of tomorrow's top headline stories. Well, I'm Marzia Hashimi, signing out for myself and all the crew right here in Tehran. Thank you so much, and goodbye.